Welcome to Clear Coding. I'm your host, Stephen Cleary. Today we're taking a look at Async Gotcha number 3. That is, fire and forget. Now, last time we talked a little bit about async void, and that's one form of fire and forget, although usually with async void I tend to call it fire and crash because any exceptions from an async void method by default will crash your application. So I tend to call that one fire and crash just as a tongue-in-cheek kind of joke. But some people use async void for fire and forget. But another pattern that comes up is just calling an async task method and just discarding the task and calling that fire and forget. So why is this an async gotcha? Why is this not a great idea? Well, because when you're discarding the task, you are discarding the results of that function. And I have to ask, if you don't care about the results of the function, then why are you calling it at all? If you don't use await, if you're not joining that execution with the rest of your code, then any exceptions that happen in that method are ignored. Right? They get placed on the task. There's like another event that they can raise if they're never observed. But those exceptions, generally speaking, are ignored. The second problem is that an application can't know when those side effects have completed. You're calling that method for some reason. It's doing something. And the application can't detect that that thing is done unless it's able to observe some kind of external signal. The final problem with fire and forget is that your application can't know when it's safe to shut down. It doesn't know when that method is completed, and so it doesn't know if its work is actually completed. And this is a very important one. I think that this comes into play. The example that I've seen more than any other example is trying to send an email from like a web API. So what some people do is they'll fire and forget off the email because sending email is slow for whatever reason. And so they'll fire and forget this email. And the problem is that that web API handler has returned to the browser and said, yes, everything that I've done, everything I have to do is done. And the problem is that email hasn't been sent yet. It's done in a fire and forget manner. And then you have the situation where if you actually shut down that server for whatever reason, you're going to lose that email because it hasn't actually been sent yet. And just as a side note here, shutting down is normal behavior. Okay. Happens all the time to servers, especially in the cloud. But even if you just want to do a rolling upgrade, you do that by shutting down your existing servers. You shut them down one at a time, right? Shutting down is perfectly normal behavior. It actually happens all the time. And if you do fire and forget on the server side, then you are introducing the potential of losing work. So fire and forget is an async gotcha. It's a very common one. I think a lot of people do it because it's easier to do fire and forget than it is to actually architect a more proper solution. So the proper way to not do fire and forget, of course, is to await the task. You don't have to await it right away. Now, sometimes it makes sense to await a task later, in another part of the application. But you pretty much always want to await your task before your application exits so that you can at least observe exceptions, make sure that the work you planned to do did actually get done. So if you do have any questions about fire and forget, please comment below. And thank you for watching, and until next time, enjoy coding.